Operation Market Garden was the brainchild of British Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery. Not usually a particularly daring commander, Montgomery devised a plan to punch a hole in German defenses and end the war in 1944, hopefully by Christmas. The plan involved mostly airborne units, and the operation's success relied on the capture of 5 key bridges in the Netherlands. If these bridges could be seized by the Allies, then the Netherlands would become the base of operations for an Allied invasion of Germany across the River Rhine. The units involved in this operation were the British 1st Airborne Division and the British 30 Corps, and the U.S. 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions. The 1st Airborne Division would be dropped west of Arnhem, the 82nd would be dropped to the south of Nijmegen, and the 101st would be dropped to the north of Eindhoven. The 30 Corps would make its advance to the north, reinforcing Allied units along the way. Market Garden is made up of 2 sub-operations. Market is the airborne assault to seize key bridges, and Garden is the ground assault moving through seized bridges, crossing the Rhine, and creating an Allied salient. Market Garden is the largest airborne assault in the history of war. Attached to the 1st Airborne Division was also a Polish Independent Parachute Brigade commanded by Major General Sosabowski. The operation began on 17 September 1944. 3 airborne divisions and 3,600 Allied aircraft embarked to the Netherlands in a daring attempt to win the war early. As glider and parachute infantry landed at their drop zones, things began to go awry. British airborne troops were dropped too far apart from themselves and their objectives. Many of the British radios were not functioning. Due to these challenges, British forces spent most of 17 September organizing themselves and tied up securing landing zones, instead of attempting to reach their objectives upon landing. On the other hand, the American 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions had successful landings in comparison to the British. The 101st Airborne Division captured their objectives at Veghel and Eindhoven in just 4 hours. The 82nd Airborne seized its objectives at Grave, Malden, Heumen, Hattert, Wall, and Honninju. On the second day of the operation, 18 September, the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment engaged in heavy fighting in Best and Eindhoven. The 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment liberated Eindhoven. 30 Corps rendezvoused with the 101st at Eindhoven. At Arnhem Bridge, Colonel John Frost of the 1st Parachute Brigade receives its only reinforcements of the battle, and he beats back a German counterattack at Arnhem. Meanwhile, the German forces destroy the bridge at Somme. On day 3, 19 September, Allied ground forces rebuild the bridge at Somme and are only 16 kilometers from Arnhem Bridge. The 101st Airborne defend Somme Bridge from German counterattacks. The Germans still maintain control of Nijmegen Bridge despite Allied control over most of the town of Nijmegen. The situation on the ground at Arnhem is disastrous. The 1st Airborne Division was forced to abandon the bridge and create a defensive perimeter around the town of Oosterbeek. Allied forces attempted to reinforce these elements, but their airdrops were misplaced, leaving virtually all of the drop supplies in German hands. Arrival of the 30 Corps in Arnhem is the 1st Airborne Division's only hope for survival. Inclement weather prohibited Polish paratroopers from dropping to reinforce at Arnhem. On day 4, 20th September, road and rail bridges at Nijmegen are taken by the 82nd Airborne and ground forces of 30 Corps. The 82nd repels German counterattacks at the town of Weiler, Beek, and Groesbeek, with heavy losses. At Arnhem, the pairs at Oosterbeek are without food, water, and ammunition. Only 3,000 Allied men remain in Oosterbeek. On day 5, 21st September, the Polish Independent Parachute Brigade lands in a hostile drop zone, and a large number of planes turn back due to weather and the hostile drop zone. Polish troops head for a ferry to take them across the Rhine, but it is not there. And for the next 3 days, the Allies attempt to hold their positions and reach the cut-off men of the 1st Airborne at Arnhem. Inclement weather and stalled advances continued to slow the pace of the operation. The operation culminated on 25 September with the surrender of Arnhem and the evacuation of Allied forces from Kent. Allied casualties numbered 16,000 killed, wounded, or captured, with 88 tanks destroyed and 377 aircraft destroyed. Axis casualties only numbered from 7 to 13,000 killed or wounded, and the number of captured is unknown. Operation Market Garden was a failure, but why? What were the factors that led to this operation's failure? Allied forces had just previously executed the Allied invasion of northern France with great success. A key difference in these operations is that for the D-Day invasion, airborne forces were supported by amphibious landings and naval artillery, as well as air support. The airborne forces of Market Garden could only rely on the 30 Corps for their support in the operations because inclement weather prohibited artillery and air support for multiple days during the operation. Landing zones for airborne forces were spread too far apart from each other and their objectives. This hindered the speed at which airborne forces could reach their objectives. Since the landing zones were not concentrated, units were forced to move to their objectives with less security and support from nearby elements, and the fact that poor intelligence failed to provide the locations of the 9th and 10th Panzer Divisions severely hindered their operations in the area. The northern advance of 30 Corps was slowed due to German defenses and units in the area. The airborne elements had the advantage of speed and mobility, which meant these units reached their objectives without any support from the mechanized elements of the 30 Corps, but it meant they had to hold their positions and defend them until 30 Corps arrived. This was not so much an issue with the 101st Airborne in Eindhoven, but the British paratroopers at Arnhem and Nijmegen suffered heavy casualties holding out for the arrival of the 30 Corps. The British 1st Airborne experienced radio malfunctions on the first day of the operation, leaving them without proper lines of communication. These factors were the main reasons for the failure of the operation. But what can be learned from this failure? We know that airborne units need to be complemented with conventional ground and air forces, and drop zones should have been closer in proximity to each other. There should always be contingencies in place to deal with equipment failure and having no artillery or air support. If the operation was planned more thoroughly and had less moving parts that relied on each other, it might have been a success.